So in this application, we can navigate around a bit, and we had a look at basic navigation, and as a nice side effect, I think, built a pretty nice app thus far. Now, obviously, you can tweak that app and continue working on that to really fine-tune it to your requirements, but I want to dive into more navigation-related features. And one such feature is that I want to have some tabs at the bottom here, which allow me to go to my favorited recipes. And right now we got no way of marking a meal as a recipe. We'll add that, of course. So to go to my favorites then, or to go to all these categories we got here. So for that, we want tabs, and I want tabs at the bottom of this category screen and also at the bottom of this to be added favorites screen. And actually the way you add tabs in Flutter works such that you add a totally new screen, and I'll name that tabs screen.dart. The name is up to you, of course. And that is a screen which will only manage the tabs and then load different screens depending on which tab was selected. So the tabs screen itself is a widget, though it will be a stateful widget here. And I'll name it tabs screen. And with this snippet, the Flutter extension gives me in Visual Studio Code, the widget and its state that belongs to it is created automatically. Now, as always, we need to import material Dart in here, and now we can start working with that. So the tab screen here is in the, should be tabs screen, by the way. So let's fix that in all these places. So the tabs screen here has the goal of rendering the tabs and then the appropriate content for each tab, depending on which tab was selected. So the tab screen will fill out the overall page in the end. And hence here in the build method, we should return a scaffold widget, because you learned if you want to manage the entire screen with a widget, you typically use a scaffold there, since this sets the background color, lets you add an app bar, and also, as you will now see, lets you add tabs. Now actually, there are two ways of adding tabs to Flutter apps, and I will show you both. The first way is that you add the tabs not at the bottom of the screen, but at the bottom of your app bar. And that's something you see in some of the Android apps that are out there. For that pattern, you actually don't return a scaffold here, but a default tab controller widget, which then has a scaffold widget as its child. Now, besides that scaffold child widget, the default tab controller also has a length argument where you define how many tabs you want to have. And I want to have two, one for all categories and one for the favorite items. Now in scaffold, you then add your app bar, and that is the normal app bar. And on that app bar, you can of course set your title, like meals, whatever you want. And you can then add a bottom argument to add that tabs element or that tabs bar at the bottom of this widget. And then inside of that bottom, you add the TabBar widget, which Flutter provides. The TabBar widget Flutter gives you here now takes a tabs argument, which is a list of widgets. In that list of widgets, you now add tab widgets. Again, these are all widgets provided by Flutter. And I will have two tabs here because that's the length I specified here, and well, that is the amount of tabs I need. So now here, each tab typically takes an icon which is displayed. And here we could go with icons.category, category for the category page. And you can also set a text here, and text actually takes a string, not a widget. And that could be categories. And here icon takes an icon widget, so we should wrap icons category with that. So that's the first tab. On the second tab, we also add an icon, which takes an icon widget, which then wraps icons dot, and then star is a good icon for indicating that this will manage some favorites here. And then we also add a text, and here we could have favorites as a text. So that's the second tab. Now the default tab controller and the tab bar here are automatically connected by Flutter behind the scenes to work together. So the default tab controller will automatically detect which tab you selected and then show the right content for that tab. You just need to tell it which content to show for which tab. And therefore, to your scaffold, so after the app bar, you add your body, but now instead of adding a normal body like a column or a text, you add a tab bar view. And that's the last piece that's all connected together behind the scenes by Flutter. The tab bar view is taken into account by the default tab controller in conjunction with your tab bar, and Flutter then keeps track which tab you selected, and if it's the first tab, then the first element which you add here to tab bar view will be shown, and if it's the second tab, the second element will be shown. Because to tab bar view, you add children, and now you should add as many child widgets here as you have tabs, because then the child widget for each tab will be shown as the main body of this screen. And therefore here we could now add categories, the categories screen, and later also add the favorites screen, which we yet have to add. Now first of all, let me fix the import for a categories screen here. I want to use a relative import and remove screens. We're already in that folder. And with that, add a new file, which I'll name favorites screen.dart. And for now, that will be a plain stateless widget, favorites screen, where you, as always, should import material Dart, of course, to unlock stateless widget and so on. And then, just as before, simply as a dummy here, I will show some centered text here, the favorites. And later, of course, we'll really populate that with favorites. Now please note that I'm not using scaffold here, and I'm doing it on purpose here, and I'll show you why in a second. So back in the tab screen, we now use the favorites screen as the second widget here in our list of widgets. Now both widgets should be instantiated, so you need concrete objects here. And now the default tab controller up there will automatically switch between them as you switch between these two tabs. And of course, the order of the tabs here should belong or should match the order of your screens here. First tab triggers or activates this screen. Second tab activates this screen. With that, let's load the tabs screen as our default screen. So in the main Dart file, instead of loading categories screen as the default, I now want to load tabs screen as the default. And of course, for that, you need to import the tabs screen. And you know me, I will of course adjust that path here to be a relative path. So now the tabs screen is loaded as a default, and if we now do a full restart here with that green arrow at the top, this is what we get. Now we have tabs here. And what you also now see is that we have a duplicate app bar for categories, but not for favorites. Now remember that for favorites I mentioned that I did deliberately not add a scaffold here. The reason for that is that now the favorites screen still kind of is like a screen. It still occupies the majority of our page, but it doesn't manage the entire page. Of course, we still have our tabs and the app bar of the tabs screen up there. So the content we load into a tab should now not bring its own scaffold because it will not control the entire page. Instead, it will be a part of the tabs screen. The favorite screen is now only controlling that bottom part here. So for the categories screen, you should now also get rid of the scaffold here and just return what you want to show in the content. So in my case here, the grid view. Of course, then also delete redundant parentheses at the bottom. With that change, now this looks better. Now you can of course configure these tabs. So here in the tab bar, you can control a bunch of things. A lot of that is never required, but you can change the color your tabs or the icons there will have when they are getting activated, which color your text in the tabs has, and so on. You can register a listener to when the user tabs in case you also want to do something in that case. So you can configure a lot there, and of course simply play around with the tab bar to see what exactly you can control there. On the default tab controller, you can also, for example, set the initial index, and by default that is 0, which means that the first tab is selected. But if you wanted to select the second one, the favorites one, then you would set this to index 1. And this index works like the index in a list. It starts at 0, not at 1. So now with that, if I select 1 here as a default value and I do a full restart, you see we start with the favorites selected here. So that is all something you can do. Again, 0 is the default, it does need to be configured, and that is one way of adding tabs, in case you want that look where you have your tabs here sit right below your app bar.